Maybe everything I've ever said about minimalist footwear or natural movement or barefoot running is wrong, and if you try any of those things, you're going to get hurt. Let's find out on today's episode of the Movement, the podcast, for people who want to know the truth about what it is to have a happy, healthy, strong body, starting with the feet first, because those things are your foundation. We're going to break down the mythology, the propaganda, sometimes the outright lies that people have told you about what it takes to run and walk and dance and play and lift and do whatever it is you like to do happily and enjoyably and effectively and efficiently. I'm Stephen Sashen from ZeroShoes.com, your host for the Movement podcast. Obviously, you know what to do if you're interested and like what we're doing here. Subscribe and like and share and do all the rest. Just go to jointhemovementmovement.com to do all those things and find all the other places you can interact with this podcast, the video version, the audio version, etc., etc. As I like to say, if you want to be part of the tribe, please subscribe. So let's jump in. I am really thrilled to be here with my friend Jonathan Beverly. I don't like doing intros because it always sounds stilted. So why don't you tell people who you are and what you do and how you got here, and then we'll jump into you trying to prove that everything I've ever said is wrong.
Excellent. So I'm Jonathan Beverly. I was a longtime editor of Running Times magazine. I worked as shoe editor for Runner's World, which I'm sure you would have some insight thoughts about.
Well, there's two things about that. One is Runner's World did the complete guide to barefoot and minimalist running.
Yes, by Scott Douglas, my friend.
And did not include me at all, even though I had sold more barefoot running products than anybody else. You left before there was I won't mention his name, there was someone who was the president of Rodale, the owner of that magazine, who it turns out was my best friend from college.
Excellent.
And I said, can you look into why we weren't included? And he called me a couple of days later and said, well, you've never advertised with us.
Oh, wow.
And I said, oh, interesting. So anyway, so I thought that was an interesting oversight.
So after Running Times and Runner's World, I spent 2 years freelance writing and wrote 2 books, one of which is called Your Best Stride. Which
I'm glad you did that. I meant to bring a copy, but I forgot because my wife and I just got back from an anniversary vacation and my brain still isn't working. So, and we'll talk more about what's in there too.
And the second is called Run Strong, Stay Hungry, which is about how to stay healthy and motivated throughout life. I interviewed 50 people who had started as youth and are still competing in their 60s and 70s.
Interesting.
And came up with 9 principles.
Interesting. So I don't know that book. So
yes.
I'm looking forward to hearing that one. I'm very curious how much of this is something people can apply versus something that's just kind of hindsight bias and that's just the way people are.
Exactly.
Do you want to jump into that? Let's jump into that.
Let's definitely. Let me tell you first what I'm doing now is
okay.
I'm now editor of Podium Runner, podiumrunner.com, so, which has a similar ethos as Running Times. The goal is to help people enjoy running and run better for life. And so we go beyond the tips, beyond the basic information, answer why, tell you what make you think.
Well, so I want to ask a question that I've wondered quite a bit, and I'm probably not the only one, but many people probably haven't verbalized this question. What does an editor actually do?
It's a good question. It's a really good question.
Do you even know?
I'll give you. I know, but it's not what you think. Yes, we do spend time making sure that all the grammar is correct.
Right.
We do make sure punctuation. But my standard answer to that is an editor says no a lot.
Okay.
Because an editor says, you get 20 queries a day from somebody says, I want you to tout my product.
Right.
I want to write for you, and it's going to be about how to lose weight,
or
it's me,
yeah.
or it's and so an
editor
knows who your audience is, what they're interested in, respects them, and gives them material that they're going to be interested in. It's going to help them. So and then I do a lot of crafting. I'm a writer originally, as you can tell. So I'd rather work with an expert and help craft it and make it readable.
Right.
Than have a writer.
So then here's the other thing that I always find interesting, looking at a magazine like Runner's World or Running Times. They're often kind of cosmopolitan-esque in that it's variations of the same thing over and over and over, which is only kind of effective for either people who don't take any action or if there's enough audience turnover that you need to tell that same story because someone new is coming into the fold. But talk to me about what it is to edit a magazine or edit anything where you have this continuous need for content, and there's probably a finite number of things to say.
Right. I try. I've been in the sport since 1977. I've been an editor since 2000. I still try to have every story have something in it that I'm interested in.
Right.
So yes, you're right. There's only so much to say, but there are new studies all the time. There are new angles for looking at things. There are new stories to tell. Yeah, as far as people and how they interact with it. Now, that which gets repetitive often is the fundamentals, and
Right.
people need to be reminded. I mean, it's
Right.
like the preacher. he tells you
What
the
are you
same thing
quoting me
every.
for? Jeez, man.
He tells you the prophet. You know,
Right.
he says repent every single day, and
That's a
people
good
still
point.
need it.
Yeah, actually, there's someone who left a review of this podcast and said it's really great, but sometimes a little repetitive, which I get. I mean, because the message is very straightforward. I like to say we're trying to make natural movement the obvious, better, healthy choice, the way natural food currently is, or we call it a movement because it's a movement about movement. So I say those things quite a bit, but it is partly because we're trying to really inculcate. Thank you, SATs.
Yeah.
People with with these really simple ideas, and repetition is necessary to a certain extent. And there's only so much I'm going to say. I mean, bodies work if you let them work. So, and I imagine that, I mean, in this book and in the other book, a lot of those fundamentals or a lot of those sort of key, let's call them, for lack of a better term, repetitive stories are things that you've addressed as well. I mean, I know that to a certain extent.
Absolutely. In fact, you just summarized your best stride.
Thank you.
Which is bodies work.
Right.
Your body knows how to run better than you do. The problem is
Okay.
you're compromised. Most of us are compromised.
Got it. So this is where we start to argue. Not really. So let's back up to what. Oh, you know what? I totally forgot to do this, and I didn't even warn you. So I'm going to jump into something that we normally do at the very beginning that I completely forgot about. Since it's the movement, I always like to start with a movement of some sort. Is there
Okay.
anything that you can think of, totally on the spot? So I know I'm putting a lot of pressure on you. Something that people could either do while they're listening, so maybe while they're sitting, while they're walking, while they're driving the car, something they could do when they get home, some movement, something that you would want to share to give people some experience that you think might be interesting.
Absolutely.
Oh, cool.
So, especially something you can do anywhere, anytime, unless you have shoes that are too tight, which is the short foot exercise. Short foot exercise, which I'm sure has been discussed on this show
Only
multiple times.
once,
Okay.
actually. Because I didn't want to have, back to the repetitive thing of
Right.
Cosmopolitan,
Right.
I didn't want to have to find 9 different ways of describing how to do the short foot exercise. And I was actually thinking about this this morning. So now's, I think, a perfect time to introduce it again. So why don't
Right.
you do it the way you teach it?
Okay.
Or you share it.
So, if you're sitting or standing, you first get your weight is equally on the heel and the ball of your foot. So,
Right. Feet flat on the ground.
feet flat on the ground, equal distributed weight. Now,
Mhm.
without curling your toes or lifting your toes, try to pull the ball of your foot towards your heel. What you'll find is it arches up. So, what's happening to shorten your foot, you're lifting up the arch. And so feel that, and then try to, once you've lifted it, again, try to relax your toes, hold in that position, and the only thing you feel is the tendons and the intrinsic muscles holding up the arch.
Do you want to say anything about cramping?
Okay, and
It's only happening with
relax
my
and let
left
them
foot.
out.
Okay.
Cramping, you may be doing a little bit too more too intensely to start.
Well, there's 2 things for me. I've also got a spinal injury, and so
Okay.
when I do certain things with my feet, they cramp up and they don't want to
Okay.
undo themselves. So, okay, now I got it back.
Okay, and when you're sitting, it's hard to do this, but when you're standing, once you get in that position again, try to relax,
Yep.
and then keep the weight there again on the whole tripod.
Yep.
So and you feel the stability of that, and you feel where and you're not rolling inward anymore. You're holding yourself up, and you have balance.
And this is something you can do while you're sitting, while you're standing, while you're doing pretty much anything. This is something I actually do this whenever I'm in the kitchen, not constantly, obviously, but whenever I think to do it. If I'm cooking or cleaning up, I'm usually the one cooking. Lena's the one cleaning up. When I'm brushing my teeth, I do this.
Yes.
You can even do it without your feet on the ground, which is kind of the advanced version in my brain. It's like, can you really do it without any of that pressure on your feet? And it's not. There's some people who like to think that you can do some sort of strengthening exercises, and that's what you need to do before you run naturally, let's say. And I like to say strengthening is great, but there's nothing that's going to be the same as what happens when you actually go out and start walking or running or whatever it is. In fact, do you know about Sarah Ridge's study? And Sarah's going to be on the podcast in a little while. Do you know her study about foot strengthening exercises versus walking in a minimalist shoe?
Yes. Which go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the gist of it is that you get the same benefits in terms of building intrinsic and extrinsic foot muscle strength by just walking in a truly minimalist shoe as you do from doing the exercises. That doesn't mean don't do the exercises. That means these things really can work together. I don't want to say hand in hand, but there's no good analogy. There's no good foot in foot thing. And in fact, Sarah concedes that one thing they didn't do was think to study a group that did both the foot strengthening and the walking, which seems intuitively that should make a difference and be statistically different.
And this is what I think, what I feel, and I'm like you. I do it at my desk. I do it while I'm driving, and I think it's almost more cueing awareness, proprioceptive, so that when you do start walking barefoot or in minimalist shoes,
you can feel that.
You feel where things, how it's supposed to be balancing you.
So back to the point where you're going to try and argue with me.
Okay.
So you think that natural is natural, except that we're compromised, and therefore natural is not possible until we decompromise ourselves? Or what does it mean that we're compromised if the idea that natural is inherently better?
Well, why do people overstride?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Do you want my opinion?
Yeah.
I would say that it's fundamentally because you're wearing footwear that makes that easier to do than not do. So I'm going to grab something. Okay. So for people who are listening, I have a foot skeleton in my hand. So I don't know if I can show this if you're watching, if you're naturally going to run and you're going to land, let's say on your forefoot, which I can't demonstrate perfectly with this because it doesn't bend quite the way I want. But if you're going to do that, it's possible and often the case that as your foot is coming down the ground to touch first on your forefoot, your heel is barely skating across the ground. It's maybe quarter inch, half an inch off the ground before your foot actually contacts the ground. If you then suddenly stick something that's a half an inch or 3/4 of an inch underneath your heel, you're going to bump into that with your foot in front of your body because that's just, you're about to do your natural gait, and then you got something in the way of it. So my contention is that that's one of the fundamental reasons we overstride, is we put on some shoe that interferes with the natural gait, and then we're actually also taught that that's what you're supposed to do anyway. So now you're doing this thing that someone in the running shoe store told you is what you're supposed to do, and so you're not going to think to try and do it differently. And in fact, with some shoes, it's practically impossible to midfoot or forefoot strike because the heel's so damn high, it gets you in your way. Even if you tried to land on your midfoot underneath your center of mass, you just couldn't do it. That's my contention.
Okay. And I don't disagree with that.
Should I give you the foot?
No, because I'm going to go someplace else. I'm going to go.
Awesome.
When I started the research for this book was after the fall of minimalism, and I had bought into minimalism.
The fall of minimalism.
The fall of minimalism.
I'm putting air quotes around
air
fall.
quotes, very good.
Because it didn't really fall the way people think.
No. It stopped climbing.
It stopped an astronomic climb. The astronomic climb flattened out for a while.
Right. And there were, over 6 months' time, a study every other week that would say it actually doesn't make you more efficient.
Pause. No one in the barefoot community ever said that it did.
I know.
It's all hand waving.
I know. But
Okay.
I'm saying, as editor and seeing all this,
Yeah.
and having told people for a couple of years that this is what you need to do.
Right.
The feeling was, well, what is true? What do we really know?
Okay.
So I went and talked to Jay Deshari and Simon Bartold and Ben O'Nig and Andrew Castor and everybody I could,
the gang,
everybody from coaches to
right.
podiatrists, Rob Cananello and Paul Langer, and said, what do we agree on? And what they all agreed on was your hips are basically shut down. You have no proprioception in your hips. Your balance is out of whack. Your hip flexors are too tight. You have an anterior pelvic tilt, which means that you're tipped forward, which lengthens your hamstrings, turns off your glutes, and doesn't allow you to stride behind your body. So if you're this way and you got this, and if you can't go this, if you can't land and push, if go watch Kipchoge, the video. Everybody right now can see Kipchoge's running. And he lands and he drives back. He has a 9-foot stride, but none of it is in front of his body. If you can't do that, if your hips are compromised such as you can't do that, what are you going to do? How are you going to move? You got to reach forward land and pull back to zero.
Well, see,
If you don't have any hip extension.
Absolutely. So, well, two things. I'm not disagreeing with that. I would argue that that pattern was engendered by the footwear first, rather than
the sitting.
yeah.
Most of these guys, just Deshari and those, blame
say that
sitting.
it's all sitting. Because the reason that I say this, if you look at kids, obviously little kids before they've gotten in shoes,
Yeah.
they don't do that.
But that's before they've also been sitting in school. I mean, we could argue this all day, but I think they probably all contribute.
It's an interesting point, but I'm also thinking about the anterior pelvic tilt thing.
Yeah.
Because sprinters actually have anterior pelvic tilt.
Okay.
And it's valuable as a sprinter. If you take a look at Usain Bolt, I mean, that guy, he's got this crazy arch and crazy anterior pelvic tilt, and so
Then it's and he paws the ground too, right?
oh, absolutely not.
No?
No. He's hitting the ground like all sprinters.
Yes.
Foot barely in front of your center of mass, and it's
And
all
driving
back.
back.
It's
Okay.
all driving back.
Okay.
People think when they see sprinters and they see the really high knee lift and the foot coming out, and then the way the leg comes down basically straight, they think of it like it's pawing, but it's absolutely not.
Okay. But the tilt is not bad in a sprinter.
No. So my contention there is anterior pelvic tilt is not inherently bad. It's if your glutes aren't working, if your hamstrings aren't working, that's a different story. What's interesting about you saying that is I've been at a number of conferences, let's say, where there are physical therapists and researchers who are trying to say, here's what causes running problems and here's what cures them. And the one thing they all agree on is almost everyone who walks into their clinic, they have no glute medius or glute maximus strength, mostly
Absolutely.
glute medius.
Absolutely.
And when I saw Bill Sands, after he was the head of biomechanics of the U.S. Olympic Committee, the one thing he did when you came into his lab is he had you do clams. He had you do things to work on your glute medius because he saw almost universally. I was on the track last weekend, and there was a woman who, with her coach, and she was doing like 400-meter repeats. And she was fast, but there was something about her, I just couldn't see what it was from the angle I was at. And then I got behind her, and when she was running, her knees were bumping into each other, and her feet were like way out.
She has no medius.
She has no glute medius strength.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
You're compromised. I mean,
Yeah.
if you have somebody who doesn't have glute medius strength or even glute max and doesn't have hip extension, they're going to have trouble.
Yes.
Their stride is compromised, and it's not natural. They
Correct.
can't just go out and run and everything's going to be perfect. Another way you're compromised is this.
Yeah.
The shoulders
rolled in.
Interior rotation of your shoulders,
Right.
Hunched forward,
Right.
neck forward, which again throws all the balance off and ends up, this is even high school kids. I've got 14-year-old girls that their arms never go behind their body. If your arm doesn't go behind your body, your leg doesn't go behind your body.
I think you need to clarify what you mean when you say you have 14-year-old girls. I think that
as the coach, I was a cross-country coach for 15 years. Sorry.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
You no longer have them in any location. They're on their own. They've
exactly.
graduated.
No,
Okay,
they
just
graduated.
want to
They're
be
in
clear.
college. They're,
Gotta be
and
careful.
they've got that much better posture now.
Well, it's funny. So I was an All-American gymnast way back when, and so that interior rotation, the overdeveloped pecs, is something that's actually the most important strength in gymnastics. I like to say that I spent 30 years trying to get the gymnast out of my body, and it's still something I pay attention to. It's just to kind of get things back in place.
Yeah.
But
which is again, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like cues typically don't work. Your body has to learn how to run itself, and again, shoes are part of it.
Right.
But I think some of the steps are again to learn how to feel your hips.
Right.
Learn how to rotate your hips and feel that balance. Get back to a natural balance, and that's a proprioceptive thing. But then often loosen your hip flexors, strengthen your glutes, get your shoulders back, which sometimes require release work, because you can't. I mean, if it's work for you to stand this way, it's really hard to run that way. So you need to do some release. All those things. Then it's not, okay, now I'm going to think about landing on my forefoot and taking a faster cadence. Then you go out and you shake things up. You run barefoot. You run in minimalist shoes. But once you've gotten your body to the idea of like, okay, I don't have to move this way. And I'm also talking mostly to runners who've been running for a while.
Right.
And so they also have ingrained patterns. They have, their neuromuscular.
Well, so here's where we're going with this. I agree with that all of those things are things.
Yeah.
My question is, do you need to resolve those first, or can you? I guess there's a couple parts to this. One is, do you need to resolve those first before you can start experimenting with natural movement, which we can call it barefoot for the fun of it. But
Right.
when we say natural movement, we mean things like that you're not overstriding, you're not reaching your foot out too far in front of your center of mass. I'll ask you, what do you characterize as the components of natural movement or natural running?
So natural, you're balanced over your feet.
Okay.
Which
well,
is
considering
kind of
considering that when you're running, you're basically hopping from foot to foot, what does that mean to be balanced over your feet?
I guess that mostly that you're not reaching in front of you,
Okay.
and colliding with the ground, and then relying on a device, a shoe or something to keep yourself. Your foot is interacting with the ground.
Well, which doesn't, yeah, because the shoe doesn't actually do that. One thing that occurs
Well,
to me.
the shoe, yes.
Well, one thing that occurs to me that might.
It deadens appropriate.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
But this might fit in with balanced over your feet.
Okay.
One thing, if your glutes aren't functioning properly, when you land, your femur and your thigh is going to internally rotate. Your knees could point in, so that's not balanced over your feet. That's
Right.
not a position that's balanced. So having the alignment of your ankle, your knee, your hip be
Right.
kind of
Right.
proper.
Which in turn reduces ground contact time
correct.
and over rotation and some of these things that cause you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then the magic question is, are these things that you need to correct I guess there's, again, three parts.
Right.
Do you need to correct it in advance versus is it something that you can do simultaneously, and is there possibly any benefit from trying to work on whatever natural movement is, let's say barefoot running for the sake
Yes.
of argument, while doing this? Or even more, have you seen, or do you think it's possible in some or all cases for just trying to run naturally, and again, let's use barefoot as an example, have you seen that make corrections so that you don't need to do some supplementary exercises to try and make all this happen?
I would say absolutely, and I argue this, all these things ideally help them simultaneously.
Okay.
That they're not. In fact, it's very hard to make one of them happen. I mean, it's very hard to run with faster cadence if you don't work on balance and hip extension and go to a more natural shoe.
Right. Right.
Because if you're reaching and trying to pull through, you can't do that faster.
Right.
So because it has to be a pitter patter, it has to be light, it has to be. But you can work on cadence and all the things happen together. So yes, absolutely. You say barefoot running is one of the steps that helps cue you. Can you do it just with that? Ben O'Nig would say about 20 to 30%.
20% can do it.
Can do it just with changing footwear.
Got it.
That means 80% can't, or 70, 80%.
And
have to do something else. Have to have proprioceptive change. Have to have a foot strength change, which is another way we're compromised.
Well,
is that we've lost our foot strength because we haven't used them.
Right, but
Foot
again,
cast.
like I'll say that you can do all the strengthening you want, but the thing that's going to do the most is by actually doing it. It's
Right.
like there's
Right.
no amount of lifting that's going to make it so that you can go out and start running or whatever the
Right.
thing is. So there's
because you can't integrate it.
well, you can't integrate. You're also just not going to get the same kind of forces. This is actually the big argument in sprinting coaching is what's the value of the weight room, because there's nothing you can do in the weight room that's actually going to simulate what you do when you're sprinting. And there's things that are kind of helpful. There's some carryover, not as much as people think. So that's a big argument. There's if you think about just the amount of loading you get on your calf, there's no amount of calf raises that you're going to do that are going to be the same as the amount of force you put on when you're running. So it may be useful. It's definitely useful to do strengthening exercises. And what's going to be the best exercise you're going to do is the thing you're doing, is running, walking, hiking, etc.
Absolutely.
So,
and just running more.
Yeah.
It's going to make
Well,
you more efficient.
Absolutely.
Because, yeah.
Well, so backing up to Benno's thing.
Yeah.
Is there any research backing that up? Is that his theory? I haven't
No,
had him on here.
I think he's got research. He doesn't say
Interesting.
things without research, but
He says,
but he does extrapolate. I think
Right.
I think maybe what if I think about the conversation, one of the best days of my life was on an old German hotel in Lake Zurich with Ben O'Nig, and just listening to him talk, and he got calls. It's like, no, you have all the time you want.
That's nice.
So, but the 20-30% is basically what he says, responders to almost any intervention. that the actual that they can respond. They have enough proprioception. They have enough awareness
Got it.
to respond.
Got it. So that's an intriguing thing because I think that as I'm sitting here pondering, I'm just thinking about the experience that I've had with the thousands of people who've gotten a pair of Zero shoes and what they've reported, and I'm iffy about that for one specific reason. The idea that you have people definitely have propensities for things. Some people are better at certain things than others. Some people have better proprioceptive skills than others. They know where their body is in space better than others. Some people are better at trying new movement patterns than others. But my hunch is that idea that it's only 20 to 30% who could make those changes naturally, just by taking off their shoes and going for a run, for example, is off based on time. That if you gave people more time, the people who are not as high responders, who don't have the innate skill set, would do better. So there's some people that I've met who, if you say go out and run, but if it hurts, stop. They don't know if it hurts. They literally can't feel it.
Yeah.
I've seen people finish a barefoot run on the grass and go, wow, that was great, and their feet are all bloody because they were pawing at the ground and doing these things that were bad, and they just literally can't feel because their brain has stopped feeling because they weren't giving their brain any feedback. So your brain just shuts down and says, oh, you're not paying attention? Okay, I'm out. So my suspicion is that, and what I say to those people is walk around barefoot more until you get the neural pathways firing again, and then you move from there. So now we're on to people who can feel things, but might not have great proprioceptive skills. Yeah. But over time, you're going to get enough feedback that you're going to start, that many people, not all, but I would say that more people than that 20, 30% will figure out that something feels off, or something doesn't, or it still hurts in some way, and they'll develop slightly better proprioceptive skills. So you don't need to be a gymnast to know how to do a double twisting backflip when you're running. It's a limited set of information. Right. So
but do you feel? I guess I agree with you. I'm thinking about my experience and some, again, what is that immediately everybody can take off their shoes and start walking around. They should, right. I mean, unless you really are crippled in some way.
Yeah.
But and also then the step of that, I think, is again one of the concurrent steps that happens is learning the proprioceptive of good posture and hip rotation, and that's a lot easier again while you're barefoot,
right.
Minimal shoes. I mean,
right.
Even for me, it's like standing the national anthem of a high school basketball game in minimalist shoes. You can really work on your posture. It's a little thing. Or again, try to stand more often. Or standing in a meeting, in the back of a meeting, and realize how to line out your terrible lumbar curve and your interior tilt but yeah. So do you think you need? I think what people felt was it's a magic thing. You put on the minimal shoes or you go barefoot and it's going to happen anyway. It still needs to be purposeful. You need to be aware. You need to start thinking about it a little bit. Not prescriptive way, but more just an awareness way.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a push me pull you, because on the one hand, once you do take off your shoes, for example, you are forced to have a little more awareness because you're getting more feedback, you're getting more sensations, unless you're again totally shut down to that. So you're getting more, and what happens for many people actually is their brain needs to start filtering out the extraneous information. This is the fundamental thing that brains do, is they shut things out so we only get little bits. Otherwise it would be way too overwhelming. And I think there's some of that happens. I think that anybody, I think anyone can take off their shoes and start walking. I think anyone can take off their shoes and start running too, if the amount of running you start with is like 20 seconds. If it's like a really finite amount, and ideally, frankly, if you don't have any idea about what you're supposed to do. If you haven't already read that you're supposed to run at a particular cadence, or you're supposed to land on your forefoot or your midfoot or whatever it is, I think if people were complete blank slates, it would be a piece of cake. And the reason that I say this is, when in Bill Sand's lab, we did a little pilot study where we took people and then we brought them in. They had only been running in shoes, and we had them run in shoes and then barefoot and then in a pair of our sandals and in a pair of five fingers, and in no particular order. And 90% of them, as soon as they took off their shoes, ran better. And we were having them run for, I don't know, it was a little while. It certainly wasn't 20 seconds. It was more than that. And there was one or two people in the pilot study who still overstrode and heel struck, landed on their heels, yeah, whatever that is. But what was also interesting is I was able to give them like 20 seconds of corrections, and they usually picked up, and it was different because they knew something was wrong, but they just didn't know what to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
So just getting the feedback, I think, can take you pretty far down that path. I'm not suggesting that it's the only thing, that adding other things can't be helpful, but I think people do minimize how well our brains are designed to make us stop doing things that are unpleasant
Yeah.
and find a way of doing something that
Yeah.
feels better.
And perhaps the only thing the other things do is speed up the process. I mean,
I think that's it.
If your hips are too tight and your glutes are shut down, eventually if you work, I mean, it could take a long time.
Yeah, it could take a while.
But to get to a point where it's comfortable, and people aren't willing to give up. They're
Well,
40 miles a week.
You just nailed it. Well, the other one I get is, I've got a race in a week. Do you think I can switch to your shoes and run that race?
Right,
Like,
right,
whoa,
right.
chill out. And my answer is, I have no idea. Maybe you can. Probably not. Right. But the point is that people want to have a prescription for how long it's going to take to transition,
Right.
and it's an individual thing. Or there's another version of that popped into my head. They want to know how long it's going to take. They want to know if there's a specific thing to do. There's so much individual variation, and my answer is, you can't speed up the process. It'll take as long as it takes, no more, no less, and you don't know what it's going to be. Enjoy the process. Oh, the other one is sort of like when people say, well, I don't want to go through that. Well, that's kind of like saying, like, you had your arm in a cast and we take the cast off and you go, well, I don't want to do anything to have to get it back to working again. I mean, that would take effort. It's like, well, why wouldn't you, you would never think to not start using your arm again. Why would you not want to spend the relatively small amount of time that it takes, even if it takes a year or two, let's say, to get your body working naturally, because then that's going to support you and help you for the rest of your life. And so I find that argument very confusing, especially because it's pretty effortless. This is not like you've got to go to the gym 3 times a week and lift for a couple hours. This is live your life with some minor changes, and it'll adapt, probably quicker than you think.
Yeah.
So.
And without effortless, without concentrated thinking about where every limb is going to be.
Right.
Bobby McGee here from Boulder,
Yeah.
The best story he said was about the guru, where the American came and said, how long will it take to enlightenment? And the guru says 5 years. The American says, what if I try really hard? Well, it'll take 10 years. Yeah.
Well, there's another Indian story. A guy, he's walking by this farm, and he sees a farmer. He yells to the farmer, "Hey, farmer, how long till I get to Bombay?" And the farmer looks at him, and then just goes back to farming. And the guy yells again, "Farmer, how long till I get to Bombay?" And the farmer looks at him, and then starts farming again. And the guy goes, and just starts walking away. And the farmer yells, 3 hours. The guy says, "What? I asked you 2 times how long to Bombay, and you wouldn't answer me. Why do you answer me now?" He goes, "Well, I didn't know how fast you walked." And so, we're wired to want to know, here's the thing that gets us to what we want. And it's just rarely that simple. But what's interesting to me is it's much more interesting than that. I mean, for me, who never liked running, I was a sprinter, but who never liked running, I only liked it when I took off my shoes because it was so fascinating. And to experiment and just see what things felt like, to pick up my cadence or to slow down my cadence, to land on different parts of my feet, to run faster, to run slower, to do different things with my arms. I mean, it was just really, really, and continues to be fascinating because there's not an answer that I then stick with for every situation and how my body feels that day. And
Right.
So, all right.
Which is a little bit transition to my second book.
Perfect.
Run Strong, Stay Hungry, because again, interviewing these 50 people, I expected I'd get all these training logs, and I'd come up with, 20% reduction every decade, and
Right.
I didn't get any of that.
Yeah.
I ended up with, for 9 principles, 3 of them are training and 6 are psychological. Dealing with all, but the training ones are consistency, variety, and run by feel, which is what we're talking about here. And that's it. I mean, across the board, people who have survived and adapted are ones who learn how to pay attention to their body.
Right. And had they identified that, or did you kind of pull that out from their stories?
Pulled it out from their stories. I didn't. I had people. The interview method was start from the beginning. I was 12 years old and I went out for cross country, and just tell me your story.
Right.
And at some point it would come out that what I do is, and often it was a transition. I mean, as they aged, but I go out. and I wait and see what this, I'm a chef. I taste this
Oh,
stew,
I
and I
love
see,
that.
do I need more salt? If I need more salt, I'll go and do some hill work.
I was just reading a thing about strength training that's related to this. That's very interesting. That people who they varied what they did on a daily basis based on bar speed. So imagine doing a bench press, and what they're measuring is, you do the first one as fast as you can, just on the pushing part, you control the way down, but you go as fast as you can when you're pushing, and when the bar speed drops by some amount, that's when you're done. And what they found is that was a really, really good gauge where it allowed people to kind of work by feel, but also have some data to know, because sometimes you feel like crap and you're doing really well,
Yeah,
and sometimes
yeah.
the other way around.
Yeah.
But bar speed apparently is a really good measure of how good you're actually doing, and gives you that feedback in real time. I found it totally fascinating. I haven't bought the various devices to measure bar speed yet, but I'm
Very
really wanting
interesting.
to.
And I
Yeah.
wonder if there's, just anecdotally, cadence is a little bit that way. I find that if you're
Totally is.
clipping along, on recovery days, I can be 165,
Right.
but that's just what feels right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when you start,
But I love that, because so many people, they want to, again, have a prescription for what to do, and will beat themselves up if it's one of those days where
Absolutely.
it's just not there.
yeah,
you know.
and so that that solves all the problems of aging, because if how long do you have to take off recovery until you're ready to run hard again, and then how fast do you run for a tempo run? What feels right for
Right.
a tempo run? And if that's a minute slower than it was when you were 20, it's still right, and it still feels right. And also, it helps with the psychological too, because if you're not comparing and measuring and trying to keep up.
And it can change during the run. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I'm extrapolating, not as a distance runner, but I
Right.
just, a couple days ago or a couple weeks ago on the track, I was completely exhausted, and during warm-ups, I just was thinking, well, I'm just going to do some warm-ups and go home. And by the time I was done with warm-ups, I was just feeling good,
Absolutely.
and I had a whole workout.
Yeah, that's why you can't decide
At
while
all.
you're sitting at your desk. You got to go out and get moving, and
This-
your body will tell you.
Well, this is the joke I have with my training partners: is we show up and we finish warming up and go, now what? Because we had ideas walking in, but we just don't pay any attention to those until we get there. It's like, do I feel like I'm ready to run fast, or do I want to do a strength training hill workout or something that's, or I call that poor man's strength training. And it's interesting. And what's fascinating hearing you say it is, I had to do this because I was getting older.
Mhm.
I couldn't rely on some prescriptive thing because
Exactly.
it just did not work.
Exactly, and it's different for each person,
Mhm.
and it's nonlinear with yourself, as you said. I mean, I feel like in my experience and people I interviewed that you'll age like 6 months very quickly sometimes. I don't know. I mean, it might be when my mother and father died within 1 year or something, things like that. But
Right.
but it shows up, and you can't say, okay, well, last year I only slowed down 30 seconds. This year I have a minute, so I must be doing something wrong.
So, as a guy who runs distance, do you have an analog to what we have as sprinters, which is basically there's like 4 fundamental workouts that I do. So it's, and I'm not going to get into what they are,
Yeah.
but on a daily basis, when at the end of that warm up, it's like I'm drawing from one of those 4 basic things, and maybe there's a couple of
Absolutely.
variations. Do you have a similar thing that
Absolutely.
So what does that look like as a distance runner?
So distance runner, you have just miles getting in volume,
Right.
And sort of your daily run. Then you have work, which increasingly is shown as important, is at tempo threshold pace, which is a pace that is fast but it's still fun.
Got it.
So like the Kenyans talk about being late for school, and you still want to but seriously,
No, I love that.
You have to focus. It's fast enough that you have to focus a little bit, but you still get there and you can sit down and
Right.
you're ready for school, and that's how you describe it for like high schoolers too. It's like, okay, I'm moving, but I got this, and I'm breathing hard, but I could keep going for an hour at this pace.
I like that. What else?
So that's very important. Then there's pure speed, which
Mhm.
is stuff you do.
Well, I like when distance runners talk about speed, and then I hear the numbers like,
Yeah,
okay.
but again, it's all perception.
Right.
It's just how fast can you turn it over? I mean, and ideally, the sort of the gold standard of this is as steep as hills you can find, 8 to 10 seconds, all out. Just every
Got it.
fiber, every neuromuscular connection. You do that for 6 to 10 times, and
You're done.
You're done.
You're done. Yeah.
And then there's VO2 max work, which is like 5K pace, and this is getting into where after 90 seconds you're looking forward to the finish, and then you stop and you rest for about equal time, and you go again.
Oh, interesting.
And that's working on your aerobic system, maximum oxygen.
So if you're doing that, how long are you doing the on intervals for? I mean, is it
you end up with about 3 miles. It depends on who you are, where you are in training, but
Sure.
yeah, say 1.5 to 3 miles on hard
Oh,
work
wow.
and sometimes you can do it like 90 seconds on, 90 seconds off, or you can work up to a mile, like 6 minutes on.
Interesting.
And you can use that very sparingly. Most of the research shows that 80% of your work should be threshold or slower, 20% intense.
That's really interesting to me because, again, I can only compare it to what I know. On the sprinting side, what I'm balancing is this. The only way to run faster is by running faster.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't practice running slower to run faster.
Mm-hmm.
The balance of that is I can only do that a certain number of times per week, month, whatever. Like basically, I've got one really strong speed day in me in a week. I used to have 3. That was 30 years ago. And maybe 1.5. Like if I don't look at it on a weekly schedule, I can get maybe 3 good speed days in 2 weeks. And then the rest of the time, I've got to find something that's entertaining, that's worth doing, that isn't frankly going to train me to be running slower.
Mm-hmm.
And it's again a fascinating thing to work on when
Yeah.
I can feel my brain just wanting to have some prescriptive thing, but
Yeah.
it just isn't there.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mm.
Something else I noticed with sprinters that distance runners have trouble with is that between bouts,
Mhm.
you take time.
Off,
I mean,
lying down,
Yeah.
hanging out, chatting, gossiping.
I mean,
Tons
it's
of
like
time.
lunch and then go to
no.
another one.
No. The typical ratio is 1 minute off for every 1 second on.
Okay.
So if you're running all out and you do a 50-meter fly-in, you got 5 minutes off before you do another, at least.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, because you want to recover as much as possible so that you can run as fast as possible the next time.
Right.
And when I'm on the track with distance runners, they're confused by 2 things: how much sitting around we're doing, and that we're done so fast.
Right.
It's like we're just getting warmed up. It's like we're going for breakfast. I don't know what you're up to.
Yeah.
It's a whole different way. In fact, there was one workout at the Fairview High School track where there was a bunch of the distance runners who were doing speed work. They were doing repeat 200 meters. And it just so happened that our timing overlapped. So they were doing 200s when I was doing hundreds, and they would get to about 50-meter mark, and then I'd start, and then I would pass them. And these are like internationally ranked runners, and that's the first time they actually saw what we were doing, and they came up to us like, "Oh, geez, you're fast." I said, "Yeah," but they just never saw it because they were on the other side of the track. We were hanging out doing nothing. They thought we were just kind of literally just sitting on the track gossiping the whole time. They'd never seen us actually run.
It's interesting. It's good for distance runners to do this once in a while. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it would hurt sprinters to go longer. As far as strength, I mean, it would.
It's not that it would hurt. We just can't do it.
Okay.
It's literally. It's just. I mean, I think there's a psychological component where it's just so boring we don't want to. But I think most of it's physiological. I mean, if I run slow enough, I could run some number of miles.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's just so not interesting. And to run at any decent pace for miles, I can't do it. And I've never met a really good sprinter who's become a really good distance runner.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a whole different way of doing
Yeah.
things. Because like you find a good distance runner and you have them run as fast as possible, and that's like a jog for any medium sprinter, who has a whole different gear. So I remember, have you been, I think it was the Portland airport where they had, was it Galen Rupp or someone, they had a big video thing along the walkway to the terminal where showing him running, and the whole idea was trying to keep up. And so it was really funny. Of course, it's difficult because he's at race pace, and you have to catch up to that pace before you could do it. But I'd watch all these people like struggling, and then a couple of us are sprinters, and we're like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
but only for 100 meters.
Exactly. Well, no, I mean, at that pace, maybe 150 or 200 tops.
Yeah.
But that's really it.
Yeah.
So a whole different thing. Anyway, so we had our 3 physical things and then our 6 psychological things.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the other physical things other than listen to your body?
Consistency and variety, which is
What we
tends
talked
to
about.
get. I mean, consistency is again with the barefoot and adapting is you got to do it regularly. You can't do it one day and not for 6 days wear your big
Although,
supportive shoes.
well, you know, you can make the transition a little bit.
Yeah.
You find that you want to get out of big, thick shoes, you know,
Yeah.
sooner than you would expect. But what people overlook when you're transitioning to some or learning some new movement pattern is that you don't learn it per se by doing it. You learn it by doing it and then resting so that your brain can integrate the new movement pattern. The integration happens during the resting periods in between trying to do something. And when you're trying to do something, it's probably going to feel weird and awkward and stupid at first, because that's what it feels like when you're laying down new neural pathways. And when people don't have that kind of frame of reference for what's going on, they'll experience what they call frustration and think that that means something's wrong instead of, yeah, you're learning a new thing, and that's the experience of learning a new thing.
Yeah.
And if you frame it that way, then it's kind of like cool, because you'll notice the next time you go out, you're doing a little better, even though what you did in between was nothing. And people forget that. I think I noticed that, again, when I got back into sprinting, working with a local coach who was teaching. Actually, I worked with one coach who was a distance coach, and he taught us how to do certain drills in a particular way. And then I met a guy who was a world champion sprinter. He goes, "Yeah, you're doing them all wrong. You have to do them this other way." And I felt so uncoordinated for maybe 6 weeks, but every time I went out, it was a little better, until now it's second nature. But were it not for the fact that I was seeing those little incremental changes, I would have hung it up, because it was really frustrating to try to learn something completely the opposite of what I had been doing for the 2 or 3 years previous. So anyway, frame of reference for how the neurological process of learning.
Right.
This is my
right.
undergraduate research, was cognitive aspects of motor skill acquisition.
Interesting. It's not dissimilar to muscular training
It's the
as
same.
well. I mean,
Totally the same.
You're introducing something new, and then you're giving it time to adapt.
It's absolutely the same. Everything is about a bout of something followed by the rest and integration period. And for whatever reason, we just give short shrift to the rest and integration period,
Right.
which anyone who does any of this stuff professionally, let's say, will tell you is the most important part. You talk to bodybuilders, what's the most important part of bodybuilding? Sleep. It's like, wait, what? It's like, yeah, you give yourself a stimulus, then you need to rest.
Yeah.
Yeah, same thing.
Same thing. Let me ask, since you're a neuromuscular person, that I've heard that frequency is more important than duration.
Volume is the gist of it.
Volume.
Yeah,
but rather than like if you're working on balance, rather than trying to hold it for 2 minutes.
no, little bits.
Little bits, exactly.
Little bits.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the frequency is related to volume. There was a study that I was just reading recently where they took people who were lifting weights 3 times a week and doing, let's say, 5 different exercises for your chest during that workout. And it was it a whole body workout? I can't remember what it was, either way. Or working out every day, doing a full body workout every day where you only did like 1 exercise for each body part. And what they found was that was more valuable, getting in the additional frequency and the additional volume over time rather than just in this shortened bursts. And it's something it gets trickier as you get older and you need a little more recovery time, or if you're working out harder. But the gist of it is that volume is the important thing, and if you could spread that out over more time, so you're already doing more frequency, that's actually better. And because you're not pushing so hard each time you do it, but you're accumulating more work over time. That make sense?
It does.
It actually does.
Yeah.
And for me, it's more fun that way. We have some really cool exercise equipment in the back of our office, a thing called the K-Box, which is one of my favorite things. And what I love about it is it's so easy to use that every time I walk by it, I do a set of something. And it's just really fun that way. It also makes it feel less like work than having to go to the gym and do a thing.
It also seems to mean that then you're doing it well while you're doing it too. That when you try to hold on to something, which again goes back to the minimal shoes too, is that you try to do too much of it, you end up doing
Form
it
breaks
poorly,
down
you break down, and that's when you get hurt, and
Right.
it becomes no fun.
Right.
You do it well for a little bit of time, and then you rest, and then you do it well again, and that time can get longer.
The hardest lesson for me when I got back in sprinting was when I would hear this voice in my head saying, "Let's just do one more."
Yeah.
And it took me years to learn that was the time to stop. that last one that was really good, go out on a good note.
Yeah.
Instead of that one more, that was always going to be the time I got hurt.
Yeah.
So
the other principles.
Yeah.
And I won't go through all of them, but one of the most important ones I call humble and hungry, which is really growth mindset. And again, I stumbled upon it. I had these people who, Olympians, Masters champions, and always it became a litany. I'd say, so tell me about your running, and they'd say, well, I started in school and I wasn't that good. I'm really not that good a runner. I was never that good. I mean, across the board, there was almost the same words that I was never that good, but I got better.
Interesting.
And that's what's important, is that they weren't, the humble is they weren't the ones that said, oh wow, I'm really good, and they have to prove it all the time.
But were they not that good, or were they humble about how good they were?
Both. They typically weren't, with some exceptions. Some of them were, setting school records at 12.
Because I don't know one sprinter who wasn't the fastest kid in school.
Yeah, well, that's because God gives you sprinting ability, and you can work on being a better distance runner.
That's Ralph Mann's. Ralph Mann says there's 8 qualities for being a sprinter. 7 of them are genetic, and the 8th is how well you maximize your genetics.
Yeah. Choose your parents well. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, having said that, they were good. There are all of them. If you end up an Olympian, you obviously were good.
Right.
But they weren't the one that from the beginning thought they were good, and because that leads to a mindset of I have to prove it all the time.
Interesting.
And then I've seen it, and coaches have a lot to, and parents have a lot to own for. Is that again, the 7th grade girl who sets the school record is at more danger than the one who came in 4th, but is better than she was last week.
Oh, that's really interesting.
But I think a lot of it was a more mindset that they had an awareness of how good other people are too, even if they were really good. It's like, okay, there's always potential for growth, and so and I think that's still now. Growth is tricky when you're 55, as you know, and so those are the being able to adapt, emotionally detached from we get latched on to
how was it last year,
or even it's like, well, if I can't run 7.5 minute miles, it's not worth going out to run. If I can't do an hour, if I can't, so separate yourself from the judgments.
I think about I wish I could remember what the world record is for 100 years old in the 100 meters, but it's something like 19 seconds or whatever it is. Yeah. And like to wrap my brain around being happy to be running at that speed is simultaneously unfathomable and super cool.
It is super cool. Yeah.
It's like I would love to. I joke about it that when you go to a track meet, an open track meet, where it's people of all ages, people get really excited about the sprinters who are like 34 and under because they're super fast, and then 75 and older because they're super old, and those of us in the middle, no one gives a crap about. We just do it. And it's like, hey, okay,
yeah,
no one cares.
So one of the principles that wasn't in my initial hypothesis, I ended up calling hope, and I came about it. All these people who diagnosed with cancer or diabetes or in a car wreck and rebuilt their knee, they should have stopped.
Right.
But they kept going. But I didn't. I thought, okay, how is this universal? And then I realized it doesn't matter that whether they're that way or they're just 55 and out of shape because they had to spend 6 months at a new job. They believed that they could get better. And it actually, I was sitting down with a former teammate up in Maine, and he's a coach, and he sort of said, well, I can't break 60 minutes for the Total Lock 10 miler anymore because I don't do 60-mile weeks. It's not because he's 50, it's just because I don't do 60-mile weeks. Right. They have a hope that if I did this, I could get better.
Well, of course.
But that's an important principle. I mean, most people, it comes. Learned optimism comes into play.
Well, I was going to say, I like that you call it hope instead of optimistic naivete.
Exactly. But there is a whole research and you've heard that term, learned optimism, using it as a tool. And so, you go out for a run and you're trying as hard as you can, and you're a minute slower than when you yesterday. The catastrophic pessimistic is, all right, I'm screwed. Right. I'm done. I'm old. I'm never going to be that fast again. And learn optimism says, so what could it be? Well, I ate lunch a little bit late. It's 80 degrees out. This is,
at the end of a race, someone comes up and says, how'd you do? And my answer is, do you want it with or without the excuses?
Exactly.
Do you just want a number, or can I tell you all the things that I did wrong?
But we think of them as excuses too. We have to get over that. Some of the things aren't excuses.
I don't have a problem with it But this is why I find sprinting so fascinating is you can't get it perfect. You're never going to have everything work right. So there's always an excuse for why it didn't go well. But that's what makes it so addicting is that
Absolutely.
you want to try. You think that you can. It's like going to Vegas. You think if I only held the die a little different when I rolled it, and I like that. I mean, I like it because I'm aware that it's completely irrational and stupid. But what the hell? I mean, it's just I find that very enjoyable.
Well, it's very interesting to me that you feel that way about sprint, because I feel like sprint is like it either goes right or not. I mean, like a marathon, there are so many variables that you never get them all right. So I'm never going to get bored of the marathon unless I decide that right now I ran a 2:46 once. Now if I run a 3:30, I'll be really happy. If I decide that's not worthwhile, then I'll get bored with it. But if that's the best I can do with all the variables I have in my life right now, how do I maximize those?
For sprinting, you basically have three thoughts. At the start, right before the gun goes off, there's no thinking, which I find incredibly enjoyable. The gun goes off, and the thought is basically drive, which means stay low and push.
Okay.
And then the second thought is stand up and kind of move into whatever the maximum velocity is. So it's like a plane taking off is the image in my mind. And then at about the 70-meter mark, the thought is hold on.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all you get.
That's it.
Yeah.
But it all has to go right, perfectly right.
And it never
fractions
does.
of a second.
Yeah, and it never
that
does.
Makes sense. I can see that.
And the trickiest part, the hardest thing in sprinting is when there's someone right in front of you, just like 6 inches in front of you. The other thought you get then is don't try to catch him. So you need to stay in your own thing. That thought is probably the hardest because when there's someone right there, you want to work harder, and that's the last thing that's going to be helpful. So you get that thought sometimes too. There was one guy he was 10 years younger than me, and he was always like just slightly ahead of me. I said, "Do you mind that I have you in my sights? That you're the thing I'm working with?" And he goes, "No, because having you right behind me scares the crap out of me, and so that helps me too." So we had a really great relationship with that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was fun.
That is cool.
So what else you got? We got hope. We got hope.
Okay. But there's a few practical ones like make other connections with the sport, so that you're a coach or you're a writer, or you have other people that you are seeing. It's not all internal, and you stay in connection. When you're injured, when you do transition. The last one is understandably love. The people, they actually love doing it, and they love both. It's not, people think that either you're a runner or you're a competitor. Almost all of them that survived are both, and they feed off each other. The runner loves to be out there, which makes them fit enough, and they put a race out there, so they run more, and they like that, and the competitor. So those go together. But the real, I think, sort of the crux of the story at the end, how do you survive? This guy was talking about, he does this relay race up in northern Maine, and one year he got the leg with Able Hill, which is like this mile-long hill, but it was in the middle of the night and nobody else was around, and he was just running. He was thinking, about to get to the hill. You think I'm about to get to the hill, and all of a sudden he heard voices, and somebody was saying, "We should go back and help him get up the hill." And he realized, I just ran up Abel Hill. That's cool. Where we need to learn how to be. Is it's all about proprioception. It's all about being aware of what's on there rather than having external markers. I mean, you're not seeing the hill and how far is left to go. You're not seeing somebody else go up. You're not trying to keep the same pace on it. You're adapting to, this is the situation right now. Where am I in life right now, and how can I do my best?
There's a fun, again, all I can do is relate it back this way. So I'm at a track meet, and there's a guy who's in the lane next to me who's like 6'4", 5% body fat, 6 years old, totally taking something to get that way. And he looks at me like really, really seriously. He said, "Have a good race." And I said, there's no money at the end of this, right? It's just, this is just for fun. So have a good time and get to the end healthy. And B, I totally want to kick your ass. and that's the reason that I like it is that you've got both of those going on.
Absolutely.
It's like, this is totally fun. And part of the fun is I'm going to try and kick your butt. And if it doesn't work, I mean, that's really motivating. And that's one of my favorite parts is that when someone does beat me, and it happens, it's motivating. And sometimes there's the excuse of that guy's retired, he's training every day, and sometimes that guy's a genetic freak and he was an Olympian and whatever it is, but it's still motivating. And I just realized that the reason that I like that for me is it's something that I do to people. So when I'm at high school track meets, which also sounds a little freaky when I say it that way, because they have timing, and so I can get an official electronic timing. I'll find someone who did well, and I will, ideally someone who did well who I beat, because I will beat a lot of the high school athletes, especially the ones who are sophomores and juniors.
Yeah.
And I'll walk up to them and go, "I'm older than your dad."
Oh, yeah.
And I do it because I want to see if that makes them upset or if that makes them want to fight me. And if they want to fight me, if that motivates them, like, I want to hang out with that kid.
Yeah.
I want to work with him and do things where we push each other, and it's a whole lot of fun. If it's the one who's like, oh, I remember meeting a kid who wanted to be a decathlete, he said. And I said, when I was your age, my friends and I, we were doing 1,000 push-ups a day. We were as gymnasts. He goes, I can't do 1,000 push-ups a day. I said, yeah, neither could we when we started. And we didn't do 1,000 at a time. We did 100 10 times a day. Mm-hmm. And he just got really depressed. And I walked away thinking, you're not going to be a decathlete.
No.
If you were a decathlete, you would have dropped and done 50 right in front of me.
Right.
And
Right.
I just love that. It's just so much fun.
And that's that growth mindset. It's sort of, it's like, wow, I could do that. I can work towards. That's a challenge. That's something to aspire to. Not I can't do it now, and I never will.
Well, and the reason we did it is our coach gave us a piece of graph paper, like the first day of gymnastic practice, and he said every square on that graph paper is 10 push-ups. First one to come filling the entire thing, front and back, gets a Coke. And we were like, we'd come in the morning. It's like, how many push-ups you do? 200. Damn it, I only did 100. And we would just like be fighting each other all day long.
Awesome.
And we got crazy strong, really fast, because we were a bunch of insanely competitive little kids. It was entertaining.
Yeah.
How much of those things that you've identified are just sort of innate, inherent, versus things that people can actually learn or adopt or become, or whatever that is? How much of it is just the way it is, and how much of it is something that is, whatever the word is I'm looking for, a thing you can change? Fungible. That's not actually it, but
that's not it. That's one of my wife's favorite words. Actually.
Fungible is a great word.
Yeah.
I used it totally inappropriately just then, but I like fungible.
I think all of them. I think people are predisposed some ways, to be pessimistic or optimistic. But I think learned optimism and learned growth mindset is entirely possible. And learned feel. I don't know what the word for that is. Proprioceptive. In a way, you could say. I mean, both proprioceptive of your body, which is what we're talking about, or proprioceptive of recovery and effort levels and all that. All of that's learned.
I think those are the ones that are most learnable. I think some of the other ones are. I mean, there's probably some amount of variation, but probably not.
Like
some
the hope and the growth and the hungry.
But I'm also. Yeah, I'm curious about how much. I mean, you identified those. I'm also curious about the outliers, or the ones that are the exact opposite, who are still performing well or still doing well. I'm always just intrigued by that. I know that if you look at like the entire domain of personal development or business development, how to be successful in business, all of this is hindsight bias. And whenever someone comes up with some theory of here's what it takes, you can find at least as many people on the other side who are the exact opposite, who've done just as well.
Right.
But again, we like to have a thing that we can hold on to, that we think will get us to what we think we need to then be happy, which is, I like to say, when people hit me up about, going to some leadership program or whatever, I say, so who are some of the leaders that you admire? And they'll say, well, there's Bill Gates and there's Richard Branson, and they'll name all these people. And I'll say, none of them ever took a lelership course, right? Freud wasn't a psychologist, right? He made that shit up.
Right.
And people are like, well, but don't you think you need? It's like, I don't no, I have no idea.
Yeah. I hope it helps people just, similarly to the physical of learning awareness, just able to think about things in a different way. It certainly helped me to go through it at a critical point in my life. I wrote it when I was 52 or 53, and to see, I wrote an essay afterwards about running against the wind. I live out in western Nebraska, and how, for a decade I raged against the wind. And I hate it, and I realized the only reason it's hard is that I don't acknowledge that it's real. Yeah, and I think that so slowing down, it's
getting in your way instead of
exactly.
Just, oh, that's really interesting.
And I had to make peace with the wind before I could make peace with age, because age is the wind that roars down the ages. It never slows and never lets up. You can't wait till it goes away.
Thanks, you just depressed the crap out of me. I'm going to go have ice cream for dinner. So I'll probably have pancakes for dinner.
No, but accepting it says I can still I can still do everything I did before. I just have to change the measurements.
Somebody asked me for a documentary years ago. They said, "What will it be like if you get to a point where you can't run?" And I spent probably 3 minutes just staring blankly at the ground. And I said, that's the most depressing thing anyone's ever said to me. But I have been thinking lately, as I've been now 10 years past that point, what are the things that I'm going to want to do, or what will I find that will replace that, or be interesting, or that I'll come to grips with, or whatever it is, or I think about. I have, my spine is basically broken. If it gets to the point where I really can't run,
Mm-hmm.
will it be satisfying to just do the best that I can? And I don't know, honestly. I have no idea until I get there. I'm hoping that I'll be able to find satisfaction in that or something else. Look, I went from 32 till 45 till I found running again, because I was trying all these other things after I stopped being a gymnast because I'd blown out my knee, and that was never going to happen again. Finding running again was sprinting was a very big deal, and those other things didn't work. Actually, I just realized what it is. I tried something else recently that I haven't done since I was 15, maybe 12, archery.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I like it is this one of the same reasons I like sprinting: intermittent reinforcement. You can never do it perfectly, and that is so addicting that I just don't want to be that guy who walks in and buys a really expensive bow that he doesn't deserve to shoot yet. But other than that, there's always going to be something where I think those principles apply as we're getting older. What else did you notice that changed for you after you kind of coalesced these ideas and principles?
Something very recent. I told you that I broke a fifth metatarsal.
Just for fun.
I
just thought, why not break a foot and see what happens?
Wearing maximalist shoes.
Did you fall off?
I fell off the shoe, basically.
Yeah.
Lack of proprioception and a lot of distance. Once I went over, I just kept going.
Right.
But I haven't had, every time I've been injured in the past, it's always been this loss of identity, this feeling of I'm no longer a runner, and I'll ever be back. I haven't felt that. I've missed it, but it's sort of, okay, it'll heal. I'll be back.
Right.
And again, I think it's a gained perspective from again, all these people that I talked to that have had much worse, and all of them. None of them go a year without having something that sets them back for a bit, and then you come back and I'll run again. And will I run as fast as I did a year ago? Well, no, because I'm going to be older. But can I still work and get a lot better and run effortlessly and freely? Yeah, I know I will.
When I first got back into sprinting, anytime I got injured, it just destroyed me.
Yeah.
And now if I get some little thing, it's like, I'm out for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. And you're still your sprinter. You're still a runner.
Oh yeah.
Even if I can't do it right now, it doesn't mean I'm not. I'm not the thing anymore. Yeah.
Anything else that changed for you, or that you seem to notice differently?
The training by feel, I adopted pretty quickly, and I think when I first started researching this, I was still pretty much tied to training schedules.
Interesting.
Particularly, I think volume, and you talk about those elements, like you have to get in each of those elements every week, make sure, and realizing, giving myself permission to increase as I felt like I could increase, knowing that I wanted to. You can't give yourself an excuse, but also just for speed work, it's like I don't have to do 3 miles worth of 200s. The first time,
right?
Do 8 of them, and until they stop being fun,
right?
And then the next time you do 12, and that's so logical, but so many people, that's a lot of masters runners get hurt. Is you
Absolutely.
Here's the workout. This is how I trained for a marathon in 1998, and I'm going to do it again.
Right.
It's like, no.
I think one of the trickiest things about that, though, is what you said. I'll do it till it's not fun, and part of what's fun is that pushing that one extra thing. And there's something satisfying about that you got to find your relationship with that.
Yeah.
And for most,
and you still want to push to the edge, but not the extra one.
Not that extra one. No, I think about that. I think about that a lot because it used to be 20, 30 years ago that pushing to the point where you can't get off the ground. That's really a thing, and that's just. I guess what it is that that the if you will, the limit that you're pushing to, or there's something where you're just moving the goalpost a little bit. You're still pushing hard, but it's just a matter of moving what that target is, so you're not doing something stupid anymore. And at 20, you could be stupid. That's sort of that's what it feels like on my end. And man, other than that, it's kind of tricky.
Yeah, good stuff.
I want to totally change the topic in just a minute or two we have left, or a couple minutes we have left.
Absolutely.
You spent a lot of time in your career exploring, reviewing, analyzing, paying attention to footwear.
Yeah.
In that time, what's changed? What have you discovered? What have you learned? Where are you kind of landing now about the whole gamut of footwear? That's a hugely overly broad thing, but I think you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
I'm actually not trying to go anywhere. I'm really just kind of curious from your perspective.
Well, I mean, in the time that I was actually reviewing shoes, I mean, I've been fascinated by shoes since 1977, and I used to be the guy that I've worn every model, and I'd buy them at the closeout, the year-old ones, for $45.
Yeah.
So I've seen the Nike sock racer come and go, and various different torsion control things, and plates, and firm shoes and soft shoes, but beginning reviewing was like 1998, and which I think was the most boring shoes ever, built. Every shoe was an A6 GT2000.
Right.
It had a 12 millimeter drop. It had heel counter. It had a medial post. I mean, that was a running shoe. If you ask me to draw a running shoe, that's what it is. So I found minimalism a breath of fresh air. In fact, I don't even call it minimalism. I call it the great disruption.
Oh, interesting.
Because lots of things happened. People finally started to say, I mean, the research was there actually for a long time before that.
Yeah.
But and I don't know what the convergent factors was, but people actually started saying this isn't right. I mean, this is all based on fear and false paradigms that this will actually control your foot and solve injuries and all that stuff.
But why do you think? I mean, two things. One is it was a big disruption when the whole barefoot and minimalist thing kicked in.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that for the first 99.995% of human footwear history, everything was minimalist. So this is not the intervention. The intervention is the, quote, modern athletic shoe. But, the research has been there. The research continues to be there supporting natural movement. Why do you think there was this big rush of interest, misplaced in many ways? Why do you think that there's still a seeming fight? And let me, before you answer, say, in other parts of the world, this fight doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. In Europe, people totally believe the idea of natural movement. In certain parts of Southeast Asia, people totally believe in this, and there's not an argument about it. Why do you think America, people still think there's an actual debate about the value of natural movement?
Well, partly is the culture. Number of things in the culture. One is equipment matters, and when somebody starts running, the first thing they're told is go get a good supportive running shoe.
Supportive.
Yes. So there's that you have to have this equipment, or else you're going to get hurt. I mean,
but I guess my point is so that message, which is a 50-year-old lie, is still pervasive. I'm curious. Obviously, my goal, not because I'm CEO of Zero Shoes, but because I'm concerned about natural movement, and I don't like when people make a living by lying to other people. I don't like when people are under the umbrella of mythology and propaganda to their detriment, and that's the way I see footwear as being problematic. So it's very compelling for me to try to pull the rug out from underneath what's common wisdom, and it may be common, but it's certainly not wise. So when someone does walk into a shoe store and the advice they're getting is the same advice, despite the evidence, despite the research, I guess the question is, why do you think that's still happening?
My theory in that is that running is difficult for a lot of people for a lot of the reasons we talked about, that they are compromised and not able to run effectively right now, or they need time, whether it's weight or some of the glutes that are firing and shoulders that are rotated and feet that have been in footwear that's turned them off. And so whether or not it's true, they want something. They want something that allows them to run.
Well,
And
I'm going to rephrase that.
yes,
It sounds like what you're describing is that there's, let's say, a fundamental idea that there is an external solution to what they're perceiving as a
absolutely.
problem.
It's a pill,
Right.
or a prosthetic, or
Right.
yes, it's
So,
as well.
so arguably then, one of the fundamental issues is that for whatever reason, we've, as a society, developed this idea that there is a panacea out there that is the solution without us having to do anything, or it will do it for us.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
So,
And coupled with that is a belief in cushioning and comfort that's that's better. That everything plush is better.
unbelievable. That one floors me.
Yeah.
Our developer Dennis, his analogy is, if someone said drop on the ground and do 20 push-ups, do you want to do it on the floor, or do you want to do it on a Tempur-Pedic mattress? And it's like, well, the floor. So, well, what are you trying to put your shoes in a Tempur-Pedic, or your feet in a Tempur-Pedic mattress for? And the biggest thing is watching all that cushioning, how fast it breaks down, and people don't seem to get that. So, let me.
And it removes proprioception. It
Yeah, you can't feel
distances
anything.
you from the
right,
ground. Yeah,
right. You
yeah.
can't do the thing that your body's designed to do.
Yeah.
So let me try this from a different perspective. And again, some of this is undeniably self-serving, but
Yeah.
another part of this is totally academic. What do you think it would take to, in the same way that people changed, or the mentality changed, to think that the modern athletic shoe is what you need? You need motion control, you need arch support, you need cushioning, you need padding, you need to feel like you're on a Tempur memory foam mattress. What do you think it would take to make the shift for people to go back to what we were doing for thousands of years, to natural movement?
Well, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a lot richer than you and me.
Perhaps.
Right?
Well, maybe.
I do. I mean, one thing I see again as a coach is you get kids on. I mean, the first day, they go out and do a 3-mile run. They come back to the football field, and I say, "Everybody's shoes off," and they look at me like, "Really?" And then they take the shoes off, and they say, "Your socks off too?" "Really? I have to take my socks off too?" "Yeah." And I said, "How's that feel?" And then we go and we do diagonals, within 2 weeks they're looking forward to it, and then they're doing it by themselves.
I have a crazy question. Do you know if it's illegal to be barefoot in school?
A lot of places it is.
Is it?
Yes. And I had one kid who wanted to run barefoot at the state cross country course,
Right.
and that was illegal.
Illegal.
I mean, we
not
couldn't
not
have
getting
gotten illegal,
arrested.
but he would have been disqualified.
Fascinating. I actually, just reminded me, Lena's niece got in a cross country, was wearing our sandals, and had to sign like this multi-page waiver to be able to run cross country in sandals, which I just found utterly stunning. It's like, have you not read Born to Run? Do you not get this at all? But they thought it was a big liability thing. It's like, do you know that your other athletes are still getting injured even though they're wearing those shoes? Do you not get how that works? So it's funny. I keep. I mean, obviously, pardon me. The closest thing you're going to get to barefoot, other than barefoot, is something like our Genesis
Right.
sandal, which is just super thin,
Right.
and you could arguably wear those. I'm flashing back to, again, as a gymnast, the thing that we got in the habit of doing was in class kicking off our shoes and rolling our toes under the ground, basically pointing your toes, to get used to pointing your toes. Not only do you want them running in something, what?
Most runners, they're going to have this huge cramp by doing that.
Oh, funny. Oh, interesting.
You
Really?
You roll your toes down, and they're going to cramp up.
How come?
You don't do that?
No.
Like child's pose, even. Just
Yeah.
just putting your foot backwards and you cramp because
That causes cramping?
yes.
Really? I had no idea, obviously. Fascinating. Why would that be? Because you're not doing it under load. It's not even a stretch.
No, I think it's a nerve thing that they just
interesting.
haven't been in that position.
Oh, that would make sense.
And so the
nerve is just being
the Achilles and the
interesting.
the intrinsic muscles are all going. Whoa, what are
Well,
we doing here?
Well, actually, if I do that now again, so for the sake of saying it, because I brought up my spine a couple times, I have a grade 2 L5S1 spondylolisthesis. And for people who are going to then recommend various ways of curing that, it's also got a pars defect, so the muscles aren't connected to the vertebrae, so there's nothing holding it in place. If I curl my toes that way, they won't necessarily cramp, but I can't undo them sometimes. It takes like a while till they unwind. So what you're describing is sort of an analog to that. But I had already had the nerve flexibility. Now I'm trying to work on the nerve flexibility the other way around, actually, so that it's not putting so much strain in the other direction. which I didn't have, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
But I keep thinking, like,
Yeah.
what's the thing
Listen
for
convince
kids,
people. Yeah.
so that by the time they're whatever age, they've had so much experience with natural movement that anything else is just seems absurd. I mean, I guess to your point, they're going to be the drivers of this. It's a generational thing.
But they have to given reason to. I mean,
Right.
I mean, as you know, parents put kids in 2-inch shoes before they can walk.
So the question really becomes, how do we make this cool and so cool that kids want to do it as an act of rebellion? And I mean, I'm
Yes,
hacking this out.
You're right.
But I mean, really, and I think there's a there for that. And I don't know that we need to go start as young as what we're talking about for little kids. But I think you're onto it, and this is something we've talked about a lot. And we used to see this when we first started. We'd sell a do-it-yourself kit to the Barefoot runner parent who just read Born to Run, and then a week later we'd see an order for the rest of the family. Most of them were small kids, which was very satisfying. I'm hoping that we can bypass that there's a way of speeding up this process thanks to the magic of the internet and social media and just how interconnected things are and how messages move in a way that they didn't before. Because if we have to wait for an entire generation, this is a 25, 30-year project. I don't know if I've got 25 or 30 years in me, but I want to see this happen.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and my fantasy is that the big shoe companies, they know this is legit. I mean, or let me say it this way. I have reason to believe that they know that this is legit. Do you think that's true?
I do, and we talked about this earlier. I do think I see improvement. I mean,
Yeah, but if the improvement is just being a little lighter or a little less padding, we know that that's not actually a real improvement.
which is actually could be more
Could be
detrimental.
worse,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. For example, I'm getting over my metatarsal fracture. It's worse. Wearing these is softer
Right.
than wearing a lightly cushioned shoe. I
Right.
either needed something that's totally immobilizing it or go down to this because
Yeah.
again, proprioception is, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, less heel toe drop, much less motion control, triple density shoes that are, so at least the foot is starting to move somewhat.
Yeah, a little. I mean, I guess what that says to me is that they do believe in it and they can't go there yet. Or they won't go there, or they can't ever, some combination. But I mean,
Well, the consumer is not going there yet.
I was on this panel discussion with the American College of Sports Medicine, and Irene Davis says to the panel, so in the 60s, we're running in super thin soled running shoes, we're playing basketball in Chuck Taylors, we weren't seeing the kind of injuries or the type or severity of injuries we're getting now, or the
Right.
number. What problem were you trying to solve, and why didn't it work? And there's a long pause, and then I say, the more you understand about feet and the more you look at the research, you can't conclude anything other than the modern athletic shoe is simply wrong. And there's a guy at the end of the table from me from Adidas who said, yeah, but not everyone's going to switch to your shoes right away. And I thought, well, that's true because it's going to take some time for people to get the hint. But it strikes me that there's a critical mass where suddenly it's going to tip, where suddenly the tide will turn, where suddenly there'll be enough people who've had the experience of natural movement that it will become the obvious thing to do. And if it's going to be driven by kids or driven by their parents or who knows, I have no idea. But I'm hoping that adoption curve is accurate, and that what it means at a certain point is not that we make Nike go away or we make Adi go away, but that they realize that they can actually make a wholesale shift to the right thing, because that's what I care about. I would love to be. I'm getting teary thinking about this. I would love to be part of the people who made a wholesale shift to something that's better for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care if people know I had anything to do with it or not. I could be dead by then. I don't know. But this is important, and I hope that what we're doing is pushing that. And it seems like it is. When we're at certain trade shows, we're seeing people who are kind of heading this way and using the language that I came up with. And so I hope that that's the case. But I know there's vested interests who are not interested in that. And I just had the idea that given what you've done, you have more insight into what's happening over in the evil empires than I do.
Yeah, and what I would say is that a lot of great people who who think they're giving people what they want. They are giving people what they want, and the
Only because they taught them that's what they want.
yeah, but these people didn't.
Well,
the
right.
generation before them did. But
Yeah. That's what I mean. Their predecessors
and
taught them.
there's okay, and maybe you disagree with this, but some of this. I know you disagree with this, but there are people who can't just that can't just put on the shoe and, go out and do a 10-miler.
Oh no, absolutely. Look, I don't think
it does allow them. The belief has some truth. Okay, I have an analogy for this.
Okay.
It allows them to go out and run.
Yeah.
And they're safe, but for like a psychological thing is like if you're raising your son and you never want him to get hurt emotionally, so you make sure he doesn't interact with anybody else, and so he's this stunted, not a full life person, but he's never hurt emotionally. That's sort of what we're doing. What you're saying, it allows them to do it, but in a way that's long term detrimental because they're going to get hurt and they don't have the full experience.
Well, this is the
full
thing.
Expression.
Well, this is the thing. Of course, that's so funny. Is just because you're wearing a thick, padded, motion controlled shoe doesn't mean you're not going to get some injury. People say, "Hey, I got injured wearing a minimalist shoe." It's like, yeah, but what's the injury rate comparatively? If someone switches to a minimalist shoe correctly, they're not just going to suddenly just switch shoes and go out for a run. In the same way that if you're just going from an Adidas shoe to a Nike shoe, you're not going to just switch shoes and go run a marathon. People will say, "We got to get used to the shoe." Same thing here. If you're going to switch intelligently, what's the injury rate for people who've made an intelligent switch versus the injury rate for people who've never switched? And those are the statistics that we don't have. My contention is that if we have those statistics, we would find that the injury rates are better for people who are doing natural movement. It just seems screamingly obvious for so many reasons. But not surprisingly, the money that it would take to do that research isn't available because typically that money comes from the big shoe companies. So that's in many ways, Lena and my second hope is that we actually do get enough resources, enough capital that on the one hand we can sponsor that research. On the other hand, if we do, people are going to assume that it works in our favor because we put up the money. So I'm trying to find the right way that we can encourage the continued conversation. Because look, if it turned out that natural movement wasn't good for people, which just seems absurd considering how long people were doing this, I'd be the first one to say it, because I'm not interested in trying to be right for the sake of being right. I'm interested in being helpful, and really, I guess to a certain extent, have people have the same experience I had, where I went from being a continuously injured runner to becoming a predominantly not injured runner who got faster, stronger, had more fun, enjoyed this, and is living this lifestyle 24/7 because it's enjoyable and it's valuable. And anyway, I could go on forever as that's why I'm doing this. So I hope you're right. Jonathan, absolute pleasure as always. We could have these conversations forever. Someday on the cover of your book, it will have someone in a shoe that I actually like. And I've seen worse.
Pure.
Yeah, I've seen worse. Anyway, total pleasure. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. Again, if you want to continue or find out more and be part of the movement, go to jointhemovement.com. If you have any questions or any comments, or if you have anyone that you think should be on the show, drop me an email, move@jointhemovement.com. And as always, spread the word. Go there and you'll find out how you can like and share and subscribe and click the bell if you're on YouTube. You know how to make things more popular. Do that. And as I like to say, if you want to be part of the tribe, please subscribe. But most importantly, go out and enjoy yourself and live life feet first.